The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Now then, great to have you with us for the Sunday Papers. I'll run you through the front pages. As you can imagine, there is only one story in town. So Sunday Times, first of all, it's a picture of James McCarthy and David Clifford. We meet again, which about sums it up. Meanwhile, alongside that, we'll come to it in the conversation, Vera Pauw, I still have the backing of the players. It seems to have bubbled up all of a sudden yesterday when 4 Irish players refused to be drawn on whether they want Pauw to continue as Irish manager. So we'll come to that in due course. We have Vera Pauw, wait over a new deal. This is on the back page of the Mirror. We have Cop in for the kill, as in Kylian Mbappe. It seems Liverpool interested in Kylian Mbappe. They're bidding to rescue PSG star with loan deal, is what they're saying. And then Tadhg Morley is across the papers. He features on the back page here as well. He's been talking to the media in the build-up to the game. Best of enemies, picture of Stephen Cluxton giving David Clifford's jersey a tug. Friendly tug. Then we have Sun Sport, and they lead with, 9-1-1. The 9 being 9 Dubs trio Chase Sam record. 1 Clifford in back-to-back bid, and the other 1 Kerry's 38-year Dublin final jinx, 1985, the last final where Kerry beat Dublin. Sunday Independent, picture of David Clifford and Mick Fitzsimons. Everybody anticipating those two spending lots of time together this afternoon. A real cliffhanger. David Clifford stands in the way of Dublin trio's quest for historic haul. And then Mail on Sunday, this will be magic. And there is that great sense this morning, isn't there, that we're going to get an extraordinary game. And either way, whichever result we get, it'll be memorable. And then FAI and players avoid the Pauw question. That's again on the back page of the Mail on Sunday. Very happy to say we have Philip Lanigan of the Mail on Sunday here in studio. You're very welcome. Great to be here. Yeah. Thanks, and Mick O'Keefe, who's played in the League of Ireland, has donned the Dublin jersey. He is these days CEO of Teneo Ireland. You're very welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you.
So, I guess we should mention, as well as people listening to us on the radio, lots listen to podcast on a Monday, so I will get your predictions and you can be abused with the benefit of hindsight. Lots of great Dublin Kerry coverage. Sometimes you don't get good interviewees put up the week of, I guess it's probably 2 weeks now ago since the interviews were done, but the week of All-Ireland final, whereas we've a few great ones in Tadhg Morley and Cormac Costello today, and then just the usual array of predictions. I mean, I see Sunday Independent, Joe Brolly, Colin O'Rourke both going for Dublin. Brolly very confident Dublin will win comfortably. Pat Spillane, Dublin defence can't cope with Kerry firepower. I'd say it's pretty evenly split, Philip. I mean, Mark O'Shea says anyone who calls this game with any great conviction should be avoided at all costs because they're a spoofer, really.
Like Joe Brolly?
No, Mark's good. In our papers today, there's a great line near the start saying they're taking it away from us, as Mick kind of said, as if it's Kerry's to take away from. Clearly Kerry own football. But there is a huge sense of the history and the roll of honour, which is probably the last thing Kerry have if Dublin win and the 9 medals goes, and Dublin have the trio, Cluxton, Mike Fitzsimons, James McCarthy. If they surpass the Kerry's Mount Rushmore of crew who have their 8 medals, that's huge. So I think those kind of factors, I don't think you can underestimate the motivation for Kerry. And again, Mark says it with Pauw. He says one of his favourite All-Ireland wins was beating Dublin in 84, and he said the opposition was right too.
Tony Hanaho line,
that whole idea that, but for Pauw, even with all the medals and the 8 medals, that Dublin are key to the whole thing. So
the Dara O'Coneja line that Mark references, he was obviously at some kind of panel with them in Tralee, and O'Coneja sums up the situation by saying they're taking it all away from us, and he very much means that 9th All-Ireland medal. So what Mark O'Shea says is history matters to Kerry football. It might just be a game, but it's the central plank in our identity to our communities and to our families. And he said, I have skin in the history game, as Pauw, along with Ger Power, Ogie Moran, Mikey Shee, Pat Spillane have been at the head of that chart for the bones of 40 years, and I take pride in that, and it will hurt shocked if they're not there this evening. It's amazing how that 8 versus 9 All-Irelands thing has bubbled up this week.
Yeah, and I suppose, look, this week, there was a lot of, like, it was Clifford, there's the Fenton Barry thing, there's always the look back, and it didn't come to the papers with any huge kind of expectation, but actually it's actually quite good today.
Yeah.
And I think in this instance, I do think, and in Dublin, I can kind of give that view anyway, like an All-Ireland win is an All-Ireland win, but an All-Ireland win over Kerry is that little bit different. And I think, look, everyone is kind of skin in this game. My own wife's granddad captain Dublin in 55. You would talk to him 50 years later and he'd nearly start crying thinking about Kerry, right? So there is this sense of history, and you do look at the kind of the critical games over the years, and I know, look, for fellas who are playing in their first All-Ireland final and they're focused on who they're marking and what they're doing, but there is that added sense of, Kerry are going for 2 in a row. This does feel like the last chance dance, or whatever people are calling it, for a lot of Dublin players. And the big prize for Kerry today is not alone to make history, to go 2 in a row, which Kerry haven't done in a long time, but actually almost there's this feeling that they could put Dublin to bed. And you talk to Kerry people, and Eamon Fitzmaurice and these guys over the last 10 years, like, they were fixated on Dublin. Like, the 2011 thing really hurt Kerry, like it really hurt them, and they spent 10 years trying to figure out how to beat Dublin, and they actually overthought it at times when they come up against Dublin, and it actually really hurt Kerry to see Dublin do 6. I don't care what anybody says. So if you are sitting there in Kerry at the moment, yes, it does mean a huge amount. Kerry means a lot in Dublin as well, but you're sitting there going, we have a chance now. This is a 2011 moment, I think, for Kerry. If they can beat Dublin today, there's a sense that that's the end of an era for Dublin, for once and for all, and it will go down as one of those big Kerry-Dublin moments.
We were talking before that this is a chance for Kerry to retire this Dublin team as it's known. Like the idea that if they win, James McCarthy could go, Michael Fitzsimons, that Cluxton, you're looking, will Jack McCaffrey be back, the Dean Rock. So for Kerry, the idea of bookending this whole era for Dublin, Joe, has to be again a huge motivation. And it's funny, I was actually chatting to Jerry Grogan during the week, who 19 of the Dublin 26 have come through his hands via Come in the Months goal. And he's obviously Kerry through and through, and just as Mick said there, he said the idea that Dublin would have gone and done the 5 in a row ahead of Kerry, he said, really sticks with Kerry. So this idea now that they could go and win the 9 medals and just add another layer. So I think there's huge, away from the tactical stuff and everything else, there's a huge layers to this.
It feels historic. To your point about the last dance, Colm O'Rourke has a great line. He says, Dublin's long-term strategy is for one day only.
Yeah.
It's hard to think of a team that have almost parked future building, future planning. You look at what Stephen Kenny's doing at Ireland, you look what the kind of received wisdom is about how you build a team. Dublin have just parked all of that and almost said, if we can get another All-Ireland on the board, we'll worry about tomorrow, and we do it today.
Yeah, I probably think that's fair. Like, if you're looking at a long-term strategy, and would you have brought all the players back out of retirement, essentially is what they've done, in whatever way you look at that. They may have looked at last year and said there wasn't the depth on the bench that was needed. They needed that bit of quality and experience back. Maybe the golden era and the generation that produced those amazing teams in that kind of 2015, 16, 17, that kind of generation, maybe the absolute quality isn't coming through at underage level. So this is a selfish, we need to win this one, and that's why they've brought Cluxton back, 41 years of age. That's why Jack McCaffrey's back. That's why Mannion was asked back. So, and Mick Fitz is stuck on for another year. So there is this sense that this is it. This is the last chance. And what happens next, I don't know. Look, if Dublin win, I get a sense that a lot of them will probably go anyway. If Dublin lose, you'd be guaranteed a lot of them will go. And I'm not sure where Desi sits and all that as well. Will he decide to stick around if Dublin lose? I'm not sure. But it does really feel like they brought the band back together for one last go. And Gilroy been involved as the most overqualified water boy, I think, as Polly has called him. I actually think it's an interesting move as well, and potentially that was to get some of that pre-Jim Gavin era fellas on side, which is quite interesting in terms of his role and how that's perceived.
Well, do you know what's interesting? As this week has gone on and I've watched approximately 378 preview panels, the Gilroy factor is being talked up more and more. this week, and even Eamon Sweeney says on the back page he's comparing what victory will mean for the two managers, and that, you know, that's a whole other
that's interesting
one. Like, I mean, Desi, say it is his fourth and final year, then he bookends it with 2 All-Irelands in 4 years post Jim Gavin. That's a bloody great record. Whereas if they lose today and he departs, it's, well, he won a COVID All-Ireland on the fumes of Gavin, and then it was,
I think it's a bit unfair. Like I think, look, any All-Ireland is a hard All-Ireland, right?
I know.
And there is this kind of perceived wisdom that he rolled in, you know, and kind of just kept driving the bus and didn't have to do much in the year of the COVID one, which is a really hard All-Ireland considering everything that had to happen. And like Desi was captain of Dublin. You know, he man of the match, in my view, in the 95 All-Ireland final. He kicked 4 points from play. Yeah. Like, he is a Dublin legend, but he hasn't quite been given kind of the love yet, you know what I mean? And I think Sweeney's line is really interesting. I think he talks about immortality for Jack O'Connor versus respectability and almost acceptance for Desi. But you're right, if Desi wins an All-Ireland today, he does go into a different stratosphere.
There's a great polish on it then. Yeah, and I don't agree with the I only won one on the fumes. I mean, I guarantee if I'd gone in as manager after Jim Gavin, we probably wouldn't have won that COVID All-Ireland. So he says, Eamon Sweeney, could redemption be at hand for Farrell? Isn't it funny, we're even like redemption, that's where he is. Could redemption be at hand for Farrell? Perhaps not. A lot of credit for Dublin's recent improvement has gone to their former All-Ireland winning manager and ostensible selector Pat Gilroy. And the hand of Gilroy is detected by many in the return to more direct football, and of the formerly retired trio of Cluxton, Mannion and McCaffrey. He will receive a share of the credit should the Dubs win today. Yet Gilroy will shoulder little blame should they fall short. Farrell must be like thinking, what? Yeah. But the Gilroy factor is big, I feel, and it's been talked about a lot this week.
Yeah, in fairness to Desi, it takes a big man to kind of bring in another ex-manager, you know, an All-Ireland winning manager. So for somebody to kind of say, right, I'm going to park my ego, whatever it is, for the cause, like that. True.
Leo Cullen gets a lot of praise for bringing in Lancaster, whereas Desi's almost been tucked here as lame duck.
Look, I think it's he's made a lot of brave decisions in the last year, and it was funny covered the Dublin pre-All-Ireland press gig, and he was actually he was in great form, but he was very emotional. He got talking about James McCarthy. It was put to him, well, just can you give us a sense of James's value to the squad? And he almost started choking up. So like there's a real sense of stuff that we got an insight into what we don't see at times. You know, Dublin being for so long under the Gavin era kind of so cold and clinical in how they go about it, but Desi was very emotional, spoke very openly, and it was very, very dry sense of humour. But like there's a lot going on, and the sense with James McCarthy, the emotion when he mentioned his name, said you can imagine what's going on behind the dressing room.
Yeah, but I think it took huge balls from Desi to bring Pat Gilroy in. Yeah, Pat's a big personality with a lot of opinions, who's managed Dublin, get a lot of credit for that era of success as the guy who got the ball rolling. And I think it was realpolitik. I think he went, look, I might need this person to make a difference. And yes, it might take away from my glory, but he's brought in someone who obviously had a role to get some of those players back, because they had a huge amount of time from. And he's obviously had a role tactically as well. So, you know, I think a very brave move to park your ego to bring somebody in for, let's be honest, probably the greater good as he sees it. And both Desi and Pat, like Pat is steeped in Vincent's and Dublin and that whole heritage around that greater Dublin thing, and Desi would be too. And maybe they've both said, right, look, I wouldn't have thought they were the best of friends, and would have been pally, or so it wouldn't have come naturally, you know.
To see him in action, I was actually at the league game in Park Talton when Dublin played Meath, and Pat was sitting beside us. He was the eye in the sky, mic'd up doing the sky. So again, he was the most qualified eye in the sky. But the nature of the press box in Park Talton is he's literally sitting where you were, and we were having the chat before the match and after, but he's just there just watching patterns, what was going on, and you'd see him just on the mic wired up to the lads on the sideline just with the odd thing. So he has that level of input, you know, where he was watching very closely what was going on and chipping in with switches and different things. So that's how embedded he is, you know. So yeah, but again, I mentioned the press day, like Cormac Costello was there as well, and the access to the lads. We give out a lot of the times about the access to the players, but myself and Sean McGoldrick, Sunday World, sat down with him, and Cormac again. We had Jason Byrne was there, I think, as well. There was a Sunday collection aside to the dailies, and Cormac was very interesting, just like for the idea that he's starting his first All-Ireland final is kind of incredible, in a way, given his talent.
I was shocked to see that, actually.
And again, of all the guys, again, just chatting to Jerry Grogan, of all the guys who came through coming a month ago all the way up, Costello was the superstar. He said of the ones who stood out,
Costello was extraordinarily talented, and like you would watch him playing club football at underage, and he's got that kind of kid that could get the ball on his own 21, beat 10 fellas and put the ball over the bar. Like, he was that good. There was a feeling that he never quite reached his potential under Jim for whatever reason. Maybe there was a strength and conditioning conversation around that. Maybe there was just so many good ones, form, etc. So, like, at 29 to now be illustrating his best side, maybe there's a bit of regret there that he didn't quite hit the peaks that he had, and even if you look back at the 2011 minor team he was on, where they lost in the last minute of the All-Ireland final to Tip, if you remember, and that team that he was on there. But I think it's great to see him, and he's the man. Like, let's be honest, you're going into this match going, who's your fella to get 4 or 5 points today for Dublin? It's probably Costello is the one who's got the form.
And it was actually, when we were talking, it was his birthday, so the life of the amateur GA player, he was sitting in the county board offices, where he said there was a nice story when he was growing up. Obviously his father, John Costello's been the head of the Dublin GA and like helped to transform the fortunes in the capital, and he said like that was the very office where we were interviewing him was where he used to be dropped off, and kind of they minded themselves kicking the ball around the upstairs function room waiting for their dad to drop them out.
He was there at a lot of training sessions when he was a kid, and he was there at his dad's place of work, and it's kind of not that written about. I think journalists have probably avoided that connection because they want to let him breathe, and they didn't quite push that whole John Costello Cormac thing. But I remember a fella told me they used to go to club matches and Dublin matches, and dad had let them kind of wander out, and John would be in the office half the time, but there was a loudspeaker announcement. It's not in the thing here, but I know how this apparently is true. So he had a code for get the kids into the office, like the 7,000 people at the match, and it was like John Johnson and Jeff Jefferson come to the county board office, and that was the code for the kids to come
Dad
back.
Wants you.
Yeah, exactly. But like, it was interesting, like he would have seen the stresses and the all that stuff, and then obviously then is immersed in it himself, and then it's an awkward one for John, like where John was there as the most influential person in Dublin GA, and oftentimes his son might get dropped the Thursday before
more often
final.
than not,
So it's that whole emotion of your son playing, and then your county board CEO and all that goes with that. So it hasn't really been talked about. So I think it's great that he's come forward to do these pieces, and you read stuff about him that you didn't really know.
Well, that was great stuff. I'll just give the listeners a few bits, because they won't have read it. I had never ever put together Cormac Costello and John Costello all these years. This came as absolute news to me. Like, even it's not even, I find all the years I'm watching Costello kicking points, I don't feel like the commentator routinely says,
no, they don't.
And of course, son of John.
Yeah.
So every year when John publishes the county board report, and we all enjoy it for the crack.
We asked him that. I asked him, kind of, do you keep the head down when your dad tears strips off various counties? He kind of goes, yes.
I'm now amazed it never said, and Cormac should bloody start the next All-Ireland, that report. So it's in Parnell Park where the interviews happened, where, as you guys say, that was his dad's place of work, so he's very familiar with it. 29 years of age, 7 All-Ireland finals, and he's never started one. He came on in 2016 for Kevin McMenamin, 56-minute, kicked 3 points against Mayo.
Yeah.
Off the bench in 17-18, both games 19 and 20. But he hadn't added to those 3 points in that final since. So he's asked about that, and he lies and says, I never really dwelled on it too much, to be honest with you. There's no point in feeling sorry for yourself. Maybe the last part isn't a lie, but he definitely must have thought about it in long post-seasons, I would think, not starting. Parnell Park is sort of second home for Costello. John will retire at the end of this year. He's been county board CEO since 1994. His mother, a psychiatric nurse, and when she was working nights, his father would bring Cormac and the siblings Niamh and Fiachra to Parnell Park to give her a chance to get some sleep. When Tommy Lyons was Dublin manager, he occasionally went to team training in Artane, but after being smacked on the side of a face with the ball one night by an errant Mick O'Keefe shot, when he was standing behind the goal, he didn't return again. Kieran Whelan, his boyhood hero, he remembers being chuffed when his dad brought him home Whelan's number 8 Dublin Dublin jersey, and it had a certain symbol on it to show it was legit. He talks about it being like the most important thing he owned. It's something I brought into my career. That jersey meant so much to me, so I often give my jersey to someone at the club or a young guy because I know how much it means to them. And then they mentioned the glittering underage career which Mick has referenced.
He was a fabulous talent, hurling and football.
Still plays hurling, it says, for Whitehall, Column
But
Kill.
the other thing I think that's kind of hidden in here a little bit in this piece is he never looked as physically developed as some of the others, right? I would have felt, in his mid-20s even. So you'd look around that Dublin team and the Flynns and, the O'Gara's and Bath, they're big, strong, very kind of, not overly muscular, but very physically kind of imposing. And
Costello always looked like a 1920.
Yeah, but if you read here, he obviously, he looks a bit stronger, I think, in the last couple of years. And maybe that's the reason why his physique has improved and his conditioning has improved. He talks about this boxing that he goes to as well in the Sunday Indo piece, and how he has kind of worked on that kind of stamina type thing in the boxing training, which I didn't know at all. So maybe that has had an impact in terms of his ability to stay longer onto it.
Bernard Dunn. Yeah. So he says, we do 8 rounds of skipping, and in the breaks, 30 seconds in between, you'd be doing core work. You do a battery of 3 rounds, and you'd be on the floor. And these lads, he's talking about the other boxers, not a bother on them. It's like any sport. Once you go into a different discipline, even as fit as you think you are, it's a different kind of fitness. And of course, cricket is another passion. He has relatives in Australia, visits them regularly. So, I do really applaud these guys who on All Ireland final morning, he's given quite a lot of himself there. Yeah. And I know if I was him, I would wake up and rightly or wrongly, I'd be getting out the old Indo app or reading your piece in the Mail just to see how did it come out, how did they take my quotes about Dad and all that, and how did they lay it out. And it just would be a thought on my mind that morning. So fair play to him for doing it.
And again, that's the point I was making, that the lads were very open, very revealing. Like, we jumped, as I think we were sitting chatting to Cormac, and he was given so much personal stuff. James McCarthy was sitting in a chair and again talking about his life story with the lads. Desi, when we met him, it was so emotional, again. So like, the lads are, this is what kind of frustrates at times, that the lads are generally great to deal with when they're let.
Has Desi been emotional before? Was this the first time Desi was emotional?
Well, I think that it's the James McCarthy factor. Like, it was just, I must say, it was the most interesting point of the interview when I was sitting there, that like the idea that you got a sense of what's at stake, and that clearly they know what's going to happen next with James, whether it's a final farewell, but like, we've sat in that office so many times and gone through so many interviews with Dublin. The idea of, say, Jim Gavin kind of being overcome with emotion at a Dublin press conference, it just wasn't going to happen. So I think the lads deserve again a lot of credit. They were very open, and the access, and like Costello's, the personal stuff is saying about the boxing.
He's more to lose than gain. Like, let's be honest. Like, you're in a rich vein of form. A lot of the guys who say, I'll keep the head down here now and say nothing. And actually, I think it's a real sign of maturity, like, that he's gone out and done this. He's obviously said, I don't really care what's in the papers, which is great.
In fairness to
and he's happy and backing himself to go and play
we got the list, and when you go to the pressers, when you get the list of players, you kind of go, all right, so he's dropped. Like, generally you'll get to, and okay, well, he's an injury, and he's
Kenny hurling subs interviewed over.
It's like counting 2 from the top, 2 from the middle.
So it was great. So when we saw the list, Cormac, Costello, James McCarthy, and they rolled out the big guns.
Colin O'Rourke says of James McCarthy, he's probably the best footballer of the last decade, maybe any decade.
I have to say, sorry, just on this, sorry to cut across you, Philip, I actually think, well, first of all, the conspiracy theory of O'Rourke going for Dublin anyway, it must be part of some anti-Dublin build-up, but the James McCarthy thing fascinates me, because James McCarthy has always been brilliant in my view, and it's like almost in the last 3-4 years people have kind of realised, oh God, this James McCarthy, and I actually think one of the reasons why, like, James is an absolute Rolls Royce of a player and always has been, right? And you go back, like, when 2010-11, like, he was brilliant then. I think, and this is my read on it, is he went into a lot of All-Ireland finals during that glorious era carrying knocks. And there was a couple of finals he went into, and I only know this because of the medical people around the team. where he was kind of struggling to get there, and I think maybe he didn't give his best performances in the big day. And then when journalists, and you'd be guilty of this, Philip, who look at the year and look at the winning teams, they tend to judge a lot on the last two games, and that's fact. So there was one All-Ireland final, he got black carded after about 15 minutes. I think one of the Mayo games he was gone very early, and a couple of other games he was coming in carrying hamstrings and knees and whatever. So I think maybe because he didn't get all that plaudits for that middle part, even though he'd been brilliant all the way up, that it was only laterally when his injuries kind of dissipated and he went into big games injury free that people actually saw the best of him. I think that's maybe why.
Yeah, maybe. Well,
a retrospective kind of view.
Well, I could never understand that either. Like I remember watching him. Like people were talking about when he was one of the great halfbacks, and then Dublin had a problem with midfield finding a partner for Fenton. But I'd seen him play. I think it was an All Ireland club semi final for midfield
against Dr. Croker.
Yeah, and again it was Dublin Kerry, and he lorded it. And this was, I was sitting there going, you could see the vision for Dublin GA, how they were going to move him into midfield 5 years before it happened. It was fairly obvious. So I must say, if of the Dublin players, like Stephen Cluxton is probably the most influential footballer, you could nearly argue ever in terms of the evolution of the game. But I would have thought James McCarthy is arguably Dublin's greatest player, or certainly of this crew as well. So I could never understand that idea.
He spanned the four eras of that team, and his performance hasn't flagged. And he's also a particularly humble and nice bloke. Like, that's the other thing. Like, remember when I was manager of the Masters and we were playing Tyrone in a final, and we were kind of saying, oh look, we might get somebody to come along and talk to the players, and you ask a couple of lads to see it. McCarthy was like, yeah, no problem, where do you want me? Okay, I'll be up there, no problem. What do you want me to say? Yeah, grand. Came up, like, nothing in it for him. He's talking to fellas he's played against, so it's kind of a bit awkward, right, because they're only maybe 7 or 8 years older than him, right? And a lot of them would be, club footballers and patched up elflas and all that kind of stuff as well, right? A lot of very good players too, obviously, but he came out and just so humble, like, wish you all success, I hope you do it, said a couple of nice things about Tyrone, how nice to beat them. Then we lost the game. But I suppose the point I'm making is, like, he's very humble, he's very giving, he's just a really sound bloke, and I think that is maybe in Dublin anyway, in Dublin GA circles, like, he's particularly liked.
Loved, yeah.
I suppose there probably is another footballer we probably need to talk about as well, who might be.
He hasn't really been talked about enough this week. Just on O'Rourke's then, the Meath man tipping Dublin, he does make a compelling argument, to be fair. So his general line of thinking is Kerry have the best player, but Dublin have Fenton, Howard, Kilkenny, Conn, Mannion, McCaffrey, as well as McCarthy, all-time greats looking for one more day in the sunshine, and it would mean as much as the first one for these men. He goes on to say at the end of the piece, Dublin's long-term strategy is for one day only. It's hard to look past the fact that Dublin have McCaffrey, Mannion, Cluxton back from last year, and O'Callaghan was also injured in the Kerry game last year. It's not quite the Beatles back together, but if the 5th cavalry are needed later in the game, then Dublin have a clear advantage. Kerry, on the other hand, have lost David Moran from last year and have now lost Tony Brosnan through injury. Even at that, the best days of the all-conquering Dubs are over. But there is nothing more dangerous than a sting from a dying wasp. It looks like Dublin to me, is his thinking. Yeah, so Clifford, I mean, it's weird. I genuinely don't think I can remember a match in GA where the conversation starts and ends and hinges around the performance of a single player. I can't. If you can name one for me, go. But like an All-Ireland final is going to be dictated in terms of the build-up by how Clifford goes.
Probably Maurice Fitzgerald in '97 is the closest, and there is an article about it today. But you're right. Sorry, Philip.
Shane McGrath actually makes that very point. He links Clifford back to Maurice Fitzgerald's kind of rise with Kerry, or how he kind of carried the team on his back in some ways for years. Yeah. But his career was built around the long kind of wait for a medal, whereas Clifford has arrived fully formed, now has his medal from last year, like you, it really does boil down to, in so many ways, to how they're going to handle him, and just the tactical side of things. People are saying about who's going to mark and what way they're going to match up, and we were disagreeing over matchups. But like, it looks like
a lot of people listening on Monday who want to know who got it right and who got it wrong. What's going to happen?
I'll tell you, right? So first of all, I heard Eamon Fitzmaurice on last night, and he said James McCarthy might end up back there. I tell you, there's a better chance of me marking David Clifford than James McCarthy.
God, I'd love it now if James McCarthy.
And I will stake whatever reputation I have on that, right? Okay. So it will be a double team effort, I'd imagine. Everyone's saying it's Mick Fitz. I'm not sure, actually. I wouldn't be shocked, and you completely disagree with me with this, right? And nobody has said it, if you see Lee Gannon going back there at some point.
Galvin said that during the week.
Yeah.
He's the only other person ever to say that.
I think if you look at it, right, there's fellas who've had injury concerns, there's physical mismatches. If you look at, say, a Merchant, for argument's sake, he's not the right man. He's given away 7 or 8 inches, right? Mick Fitz physically has that presence. But like Mick Fitz was the man who got the man marking job on, the Gooch when the Gooch was at his peak. So it's a different. You've got two fellas at very different stages of career, right? So Mick Fitz could do it, and he's brilliant. I would think that Dublin might go Lee Gannon. He's physically able for him. He's quick. He's tough as nails, and he might be the man who might end up getting that job either at the start or at some point. Yeah. And I might look really stupid.
Look, you could be right, mate. Just again, the problem with Clifford, one of the many problems as a marker is generally with the Gooch and all, you could match up different players, maybe size wise, but Clifford immediately rules out, I would have thought, Owen Merchant, say, just physically. Lee Gannon, again, he's still only young, so I would have thought power wise, I'm not sure. So Fitzsimons just matches up physically, and that's before you even think, does your defender have the skill set to go? So I would have thought the obvious one, and I'm looking at the tactical setup here in the Sunday Times, that Brian Howard is listed midfield, but he'll just swap with James McCarthy and sit. I would have thought play that +1 that Dublin in front of Fitzsimons, because Kerry will have a 2-man inside line. So if Clifford lines up just to the left here, Howard will just sit in that pocket in front of him and kind of follow when they can. Now, I would have thought that's one, or somebody will, and Howard's the likely one from East, but we'll see. But Clifford is not a one man, even a 2-man job. It's the team really.
It's very rare you get this all pinned on one guy, like Messi going into the World Cup final for Argentina, or like it's at that scale. And like, I think Dublin have been quite clever here, whether it's by accident or design, where like some of the quotes coming out of Dublin camp this week, whether people have noticed, and it's like, oh well, we'd be happy to keep him to 8 points, and you're like, what pressure to put on the opponent to say, like, we think you're this good, like, so if he doesn't go out and shoot 8 points, it's almost like it's a poor performance. But like I found the and look, it is rightfully back, and he's probably the best like I've ever seen. He is unbelievably good, and he now has this ability where he goes out and wins his own ball out the middle of the field and gets up and finishes the move. But the article in the
Mick Foley's
piece is you come into it going again with low expectations on any article about Clifford, but he goes obviously with his deep kind of roots in the region. He goes in and he talks about when he was a kid and a 6-year-old, and I suppose the overarching theme of it is this guy has been great since he was 5, and he's ready, and he doesn't mind the pressure because he's always had it.
But there's a line here again, and fair play to Mick, and kind of delve deeper and give you stuff that you wouldn't have read before. He said, like, there's a first sighting of Clifford in an under-12 game against Kenmare in September 2007, buried in the local news from Fossa. Kenmare had too much strength and class, wrote the correspondent. However, David Clifford, at just 8 years of age, gave a fabulous display of intelligent football at wing forward for Fossa, which belied his tender years.
Wow.
So
amazing.
It's brilliant to see that even the diamond was there from such a young age, and there's loads of lovely little stories.
The quote about Colin Cooper's brother, Vince Cooper, right? About he comes through with this thing around when he's talking about he's a games development officer, right? And he talks about now Vince is Colum's brother, says Quirk. So he's seen Colum, and if Vince is saying there's a kid in the school that looks wow, wait till you see this fella, well, he must be good. So I think, and it's very Kerry, like they are obsessed, I know, with football. So you can imagine the talk around this guy since he was 8, 9, and he's managed to.
But he says this here, his name is
the minor final where he scored 4 goals. I remember being at that, and I was there bloody early because I've been hearing about that guy all week. It was the senior final on the same day, and it was like, you need to get there early and see this Clifford kid, you know. And he scored 4 goals, so the pressure did get to him that day. And I know I don't want to impinge or step across a line, but I must say, every time I watch him and Pauw all year, I think they did it the weekend of their mother's passing, but as anyone who's gone through bereavement knows, sometimes the weeks and months afterwards, as reality sets in, are even more difficult. And so that's a family dealing with that on top of everything. So, you know, and they're putting in these extraordinary performances. Like, so you just you can't but love them.
Both of them as well.
Yeah, both of them.
But you mentioned personality-wise, I think David, any of the dealings we've had or anyone you talk to, like, he's such a sound guy. Like, he comes across so well. He's so mature at that age. Again, the media stuff, any of the interviews, like, there's no he'll answer a straight question, give you a bit of time, give you a straight answer, and like he I don't know how he kind of remains so grounded amongst the madness of it all, but he seems to be a kind of special character. He's
also grown up in front of our eyes. Like, kids make mistakes, and you know, he's grown up, and with intense scrutiny. He had a couple of wobbles there a couple of years ago where his form dipped slightly, you know, when they lost that Munster game against Cork. That horrible day, and you know, you kind of felt, God, he's a few growing pains, but geez, it didn't last too long now. And
that's a growing pain, I take it.
He's amazing.
Well, that's the football. So give me a prediction then.
If you look at it's very close to the 2019 teams, and I just think Kerry are a little bit better, and Dublin maybe are 4 years older and not quite at the same level, so maybe Kerry.
Yeah.
Look, last week I was definitely Kerry. Up to yesterday I thought Dublin, and I woke up this morning and I think Kerry, you know, if you're going for two teams at full throttle and the younger, hungry, up and coming upstart, you know, do we think of Dublin subconsciously? We go back to what they were like rather than what they are like.
Yes, I know.
And I think if you asked me to put my money on it, I would say marginally Kerry. I hate saying that, but I just think they might.
It's funny, we haven't actually mentioned Con O'Callaghan, who could score 2 goals and win the match single-handedly. You know, it's only a couple of seasons ago we were doing comparison pieces with Clifford and Con until Clon.
It's ifs, buts and maybes. Like, Dublin will need Con, and they will need Mannion if he plays, and they'll need Scully and all these guys to play better than they've probably played in a while, right? If Dublin can spread those scores around, they've every chance of winning. And Kerry need to spread their scores around too, because you can't expect Clifford to score 115, right? So they need other fellas. He might. They need other fellas to do it. So look, it's hard to call, I think.
No, well, it bloody
makes
hard to call, yeah.
Even more intriguing.
Michael Duignan had an interesting it's like the small piece at the bottom of his main piece. His main piece is about Limerick, but it was just an eye-catching headline. It was only about 200 or 300 words. Our big day in Croker was a deflating experience, is the headline. So he says there's been a good bit of controversy. I hadn't realised, by the way, there was controversy. There's been a good bit of controversy around the Jubilee team celebration at Croke Park last Sunday. Obviously, I was there with Offaly, the Offaly hurlers, who had won 25 years ago. Back home, there was a huge anger that it wasn't shown in RTE and that it took place in a half-empty stadium rather than, say, at half-time when the place would be full. Now, we were up, we had a nice lunch as a group before going out in the field. 3 or 4 of us were up the night before to Dublin. Most came up the day by car or train. The players of that era wouldn't have gotten a lot out of the game. Why not put them up in the Croke Park Hotel the night before, he asks. People love that Offaly team with no minor game on anymore and no big crowd in. It was a bit deflating. Of course, we had a great day. We were delighted to get together, but a flat build-up with no curtain raiser is not what All-Ireland Final Day is meant to be about. The Offaly team filled Croke Park on many occasions. I hope Cork next year, along with future teams, get the respect and recognition they deserve. I can see how that would be a bit deflating. Traditionally, my memories going back are seeing it on TV and RTE, and people really enjoy seeing it. I mean, in our house anyway, it was like... Now, it's weird to be in the same boat all of a sudden, but it was your parents going, oh God, is that 25 years ago? Is that your man? To me, they were old men. Now they're starting to look very familiar. But it doesn't sound great. I guess the minor match maybe had a few more souls in their seats a touch earlier. So going out to an empty Croke Park and not on TV is probably not what you pictured 10 years ago when you were heading out.
Yeah, and I was in there for it last week, and even there's a detail Michael said that when the players, they go to the corner and there's usually a bench and they get a kind of team photo there with the the pitch's background, and I think there was no bench. He said some of the lads were down in their new suits on the grass, and and I was there. There's no, the GA actually, Eamon Sweeney has a piece in the back of the Sunday Indo kind of saying how the GA kind of hasn't been great this year. Actually, I disagree with a huge amount, but the one thing they haven't got right is final day. Like, it was again in early ahead of the hurling final last year. You could drive down Whitworth Road an hour and a half before the match, and there was a few supporters around, but it was raining. There's no build up because there's no curtain raiser. The minor final, whatever about the changes there, but they need a proper curtain raiser beforehand. So on final day, you wouldn't actually nearly be able to sit here, because I remember being parked up in Clonliffe car park at 11 o'clock. Croker would be absolutely buzzing, and it's filled into this. There's a void there for the curtain raiser, and because there's no curtain raiser, the crowd don't come in. And I thought it was terrible to have brilliant players, like loved players, that Offaly team. If you're a fan of hurling, you love that team, to be sitting again in a half-empty stadium, because the crowd aren't in. And again, I was looking at the monitor in front of us. RTE weren't showing it, so and they tried to delay it. In fairness, RTE were the live pictures were, because it was closer to match kickoff and they were getting into changes. And because the previous year, I think Wexford, again, there was huge uproar over I think the Jubilee team with Wexford and Clare again happened. And again, there was such lack of coverage before it, so they were trying to kind of bring it late, but it is wrong. Like, they need to fix the day, final day. There should be a buzz around the place from early doors, and again, to give the players of the past need proper recognition, whether that's half time or whatever.
Look, the GA get a lot right, but they do get some things wrong, and I think in this instance, I think it doesn't read right, and I think you can look at it any way you want. Like, I think there's an issue with All-Ireland finals weekends, and I think I would argue, and I know you slightly disagree with this, it needs to go out a little bit and go into August and push into the second and third weeks in August for loads of reasons, promotional reasons, and also, like, surely our All-Ireland weekends should be like Super Bowl weekends, right? That's what we should try and do. So there was a time where the Sevens was a big occasion. That's kind of happens and you don't even know it's on. Sevens was part of the weekend. Fellas would come up for weekends of All-Irelands. I was talking to a fella in the office the other day from Kerry, and he's 30 or 40 mates coming up. I said, how many of them are coming up staying the night? One, I think, is staying the night. They're all coming up the morning, down the morning. It's not the sense of, there should be a festival on in Dublin on an All-Ireland weekend. It should be at a time where you're given a couple of weeks to plan it. There should be music, there should be a match on before, whether it's a camogie match for the hurling or an underage game or a developmental, something on to get people in a bit
a sense
earlier.
of Crow Park's alive for the day.
Fan zones, all that stuff should be there, and part of that should be a celebration of people from 25 years ago. Like, I'd love to have seen that Offaly team, and I'd love to see a little mini documentary, because they were all great characters.
Right.
So I think it's a Galway. Is it Galway? 98 Galway. What a team!
Kildare in 98.
What a team! And that was one of the best displays in an All-Ireland final ever. I'd love to see a rerun of that game. There should be a dinner and a banquet for them the night before. Get them out in the pitch, and let people kind of recognise them. So I think in this instance, I think maybe this is simply the fact that you can put things down to this post-COVID, we haven't really found a rhythm yet and stuff, and the dates kind of still, I personally don't like it, and I think I haven't even gone on my holidays yet and the All-Ireland finals are over.
Same,
So I just feel it's a bigger conversation around the final should be a weekend of celebration in the capital.
You make the point very well. So the weekend feels a bit bare at the moment, and I'd say there'd be a great appetite. Anything you put on, I think people would love to go to. I wonder, is affordability an issue with Kerry boys, 40 of them dodging a Dublin hotel on the Saturday night?
Absolutely, but even
that's not GA's fault.
No,
but be in early. The fans who are coming up, if you're coming, the fans want to be in the stadium early. I was down at the Munster hurling final this year, and Ennis Road, 3 hours before, they were waiting for the turnstiles to be open. Because the buzz about the place, and that is a typical Jones Road All-Ireland final day, but that was completely lacking. But
regardless of the hotel affordability issue, which is an issue, like, there's nothing to say that you wouldn't have something on the Saturday to encourage people to go to, and then also there's something happening around the ground or in the city centre, like not quite a tailgate, but why not borrow from other sports, and we have a big fan zone area celebration of hurling and football, whatever the day is, and you get people up there at 11, 12 o'clock. I guarantee you if people are travelling up, they'll go to it.
Yeah.
Now, they mightn't come from Mulligan's on Poolbeg Street 5 minutes before the match either way.
In some ways, the GA were ahead of the curve with the Jubilee team. It was such a lovely touch and that bit of pageantry, and it tapped into the kind of the scale of the day that in 25 years, whoever wins is going to be back here, and you know, the significance of it. So to kind of lean away from that is almost counterintuitive at this point. But anyway, we'll push on. I mentioned the front pages. It's amazing. Like maybe it's the time difference in Australia, or just you kind of had assumed that things were progressing between the FAI and Vera Pauw, but now all of a sudden it's front page and back page news that actually tomorrow's starting to look like Vera Pauw's last game, reading between the lines. So front page of the Sunday Times, Pauw, I still have the backing of the players. Mark Gallagher has a big piece on the Mail on Sunday. FAI and players avoid the Pauw question, and David Kelly as well in the Sunday Independent has a big piece. So the short version is Jonathan Hill and the FAI are out there, but they're declining to talk to the media, even though they had said that they would talk to the media in Australia. This was always one of their go-to lines on the back of the Athletic piece, which blew up pre-World Cup, and they're not talking to the media. And then what seems to have happened over the last 24, 48 hours is that various players have been asked to give their backing to Pauw and have declined the opportunity to do so. Now, they certainly haven't said we want rid of her, but they've said things like Louise Quinn, one of the more experienced players in the team, asked about Pauw. I haven't thought that much forward. I'm wondering what I'm having for lunch later, and I'm wondering what the schedule is for tomorrow. Kira Carusa, honestly, we're still at the World Cup. It's my first World Cup, and I think we owe it to ourselves to stay focused on that. Lily Agg, to be honest, I think that's something as players that we can't really think about. And Lucy Quinn, honestly, it's not something I'm thinking about. And I guess it chimes with Katie McCabe at that touchy enough press conference before the French game, where with Pauw sitting beside her, she was asked would she like to see Pauw there for the Nations League game in September, and she said that's not my job. So again, we could all be overreading into those dispatches, but equally I think in the main, when players are asked about a current manager, they tend to give a backing, would be my sense of football players ad infinitum. They say, yeah, we love the manager, we want the manager to stay. That's certainly what happens around Stephen Kenny with the players. Pauw, for her part, has said she feels that she thought things were progressing. She wants the contract sorted. Even in a kind of exchange with several journalists, she says, well, what have you heard about the contract, is kind of the tone. And she is adamant that she's still able to touch the players, to reach the players, is how she put it, and that maybe at 6 years there tends to be a bit of a fatigue factor between manager and players. But she, you know, that's 2 years away, and she still feels that she's supported by the group, and she hopes things are sorted out. So that's kind of the summation across the three pieces. But it does, Philip, from kind of FAI, Vera's our woman, pre-World Cup, there seems to have been a genuine cooling, is the read on the journalists out in Australia over the last couple of weeks.
Absolutely, and fairness, Mark Gallagher is out there for us, and there's a very comprehensive piece about the team and Vera in the future, and it kind of, even the headline nearly captures it. So what happens next? Eventful World Cup will be a trigger for change in personnel and approach. There doesn't seem to be any doubt there. So there is a real sense, and Mark goes through the kind of campaign from the negative sideshow before, like there's tactical confusion, and kind of gets into a bit of analysis which, you know, maybe looks at some of the shortcomings, sideline wise, tactical wise, setup wise. Again, mentioned selection issues, and the idea now that Ireland, this team, needs somebody to take the team to evolve the pattern of play and the style of play. And it's very much an open-ended question, but it doesn't really give you that sense that Vera Pauw is going to be the one to do that. So yeah, isn't that a big change with the mood we all thought was there 2 weeks ago? It is, and I guess you'd trust the journalists who are on the ground over there probably get a much clearer sense than, you know, your once-off match and your very quick grab with the players about what's going on or around a camp. So when you're out there, you're probably hearing a lot of stuff that's not even printed. So I think the sense, we're all getting the sense that change could be happening where, you know, in different...
Does that suggest it's off the field, though? Because... And I don't know, but I'm just like, a few of the pieces allude to FAI being deeply unhappy that, according to the Athletic, Pauw almost initiated that Athletic piece, which brought allegations to the fore again, and the FAI were really unhappy with that. Because, like, Paul Rowan says, it would be extraordinary if the FAI was not to renew the contract of a manager who led Ireland to their first World Cup and remains popular amongst the general public.
And you mentioned the RT Personality of the Year thing last year as well.
Yeah.
I look,
like the defeat to Australia wasn't a 6-0 hammering. The performance against Canada was okay. Like, had the performance been so bad that the FAI have suddenly thought, well, this isn't
no, and I think
anymore?
look, there's a bit of this is sports associations here, including the FAI in the past and including the RFU, have been criticised for renewing contracts under pressure from agents and managers ahead of World Cups, right? So there's an element of, I think, wait and see here. And I think the fact that there's a party line amongst players, even Vera Pauw herself to a point, and the FAI, that look, we'll get to this after the World Cup, is actually causing the speculation even more, right? So she hasn't, in fairness, gone and put a gun to their head and said, here, you got to back me or I'm gone 3 weeks out from a World Cup, which would have been a really awkward situation. And I think the FAI have been quite measured, and they won't get credit for this, but there will be a review, and then after that review, I think everyone needs to take a step back. And we talked about this earlier, Vera Pauw will go down in history as the person who brought us to a World Cup, and I think she's done a really good job. Is she the right person to take Ireland into the next generation and progress them further? I don't know. And that's the question they're going to have to ask themselves. And none of the players are jumping up and down saying I'm gone if she's not here either. So it's going to be an interesting one when they get back and they take the cold light of day, get out of the heat of the World Cup. I actually think it's a sensible thing to do, is to take stock and everyone do a very measured review and say, okay, well, is this the right person to take us forward? My own sense of it is that there's probably a conversation going on around, she got us this far. I actually personally think we've done quite well in the games, with the hand that she has. Yeah. You need 5 Katie McCabe to get out of that group. We didn't get hammered. We were hoping for a draw against Australia. Canada was always going to be a stretch. Yeah. The game, I think, that's going to determine, you talked about Desi earlier, and the game is going to determine whether this was a successful World Cup or not, is can we get a result in the last game. If we get a draw or a win in the last game, I think people will reflect and say that was a pretty good outing, and that changed the dynamic of the conversation a bit. If we lose to a team that's ranked below us, I think that then people takes the gloss off it. But I have been really surprised at the uneducated, I'd almost say, criticism of some of the decisions that have been made. People are going on about in hindsight, oh well, she took this girl off, she took that girl off, or didn't start her, and we're not at training. We don't know who's playing well and who's not playing well, and who's carrying a niggle and who's not, and why decisions are made. I actually think she sets the team up very defensively in order to and try and play in a counter-attack and try and nick a goal, because I think she feels that that's the way we should play with the hand that she has. Yeah. And that's fair enough. And she's one who sees it on a day-to-day basis. But now I do get it that there's...
Just on that, the start of Mark's piece, though, doesn't really reflect great, saying that Heather Payne was struggling, the wing-back's right thigh was heavily strapped, and then all of a sudden 20 minutes before the game there's a change, we
don't know it, right? And fairness to Mark, he's done a really good job in that art, but we don't know, did they say we're just going to give you one last chance before the warm-up? If it goes, it goes, particularly with hamstrings. If you do your run before if you feel it, you're gone. And Anya was already told the day before, look, you're probably going to be playing. It does read like she was only told with 5 minutes notice. Who knows? I don't know.
I can't imagine that happening in Croker today, one of the lads.
To be fair, in fairness, Keane Lynch hobbled into how many All-Ireland finals under the greatest manager we've ever seen, maybe, and his hamstring went after 15 minutes one game. You don't hold that against Jim Gavin. I think that point is harsh. The general style of play, Louise Quinn up top as your kind of last 10-15 minutes, hope and a prayer centre forward. To be fair to Pauw, she is entitled to think, well, we're not good enough in possession to work through the lines methodically, and we're setting up defensively, we're staying in games, and us nicking a goal from a set piece, I feel that's the best way to win with this group. And as Stephen Kenny has found out, she may well be right about that, we maybe have a certain level. We do need more Denise O'Sullivan's, Katie McCabe's, Sinead Farrelly's.
The point in here is exactly like the men's team has been over the last 20 years, is they raise their game to play against better teams and struggle to break down weaker opposition. That's exactly the same as it's an age-old Ireland problem. I personally think this team is the pioneers, right? And they have inspired a generation. And I think the fact that they've performed respectfully and have done quite well, in fact, I think will inspire the next generation. If you look at the rankings of the Irish women's international teams, under 19, under 17, under 15, we tend to be, top 16, top 10, top whatever. There's a generation coming that's better than this generation. And I suppose the question is who is the right. There's a big conversation. You need a player pathway that has loads more girls playing. You need a better domestic league. We need 5 or 6 girls playing for Chelsea or Arsenal if we're going to get to the next level.
Is there
we're
a
tier 3 nation and we need to get to be a tier 2 nation. Is she the white woman? That's the question they have to ask themselves.
But again, given I would have thought Vera Pauw's helped make the Ireland team a much more attractive proposition, but is that kind of maybe working against her in a way that maybe the FAI are looking that now this team is well branded, well supported, and that now the cast of candidates maybe would be very different than if you roll back a couple of years ago.
That's a fair point. How significant do you find the players kicking to touch? All of them? Not insignificant.
But maybe it's a drill, like maybe that's the party line and it's been spelled out. But like you say, players generally, you mentioned Stephen Kenny, what happens there? Players, if they tend to, when they want to, speak their mind as well. So, but look, maybe they've had the conversation previously that this is going to come up, and so. But
it is interesting, and it'll be more interesting when the review is done, because to be fair to the FAI, like, they are going to go through a rigorous process, I'd imagine, afterwards, and all the players will be interviewed. And is it better that they air if they've grievances or if they've got things they want to say in private and not? But all this is done is because nobody is confirming or denying the contractual situation. The FAI have kicked it to post-tournament. Obviously the players have been told kick everything to post-tournament as well, and people sit down in a measured way, and it's a big call, but it is about the future and who's the person to take the next generation forward. But there is a huge, like, women's soccer it reminds me of women's Gaelic 20 years ago. It's like an absolute about to burst, and it's brilliant, and it's great to see.
Yeah, I would think come September at Aviva Stadium they'll be getting great crowds.
I hope so.
There'll be big events. A couple of other quick pieces before we finish up. So on All Ireland winners, I guess a slight problem with the calendar is you go from one All Ireland final into the next, and there's almost not much time for a kind of a recap. So Michael Dignan and Mick Foley writing about Limerick, for instance, and it almost feels just slightly dated because the football final is today. It feels like this was last month, which is the way your brain tends to work. So he's just as in awe as everybody. He says 2020 decided they put 30 points on Waterford. 2021 obliterated all manner of scoring records by hammering Cork, and they racked up 332, 318 of that in the first half. 318 in the first half. I'd forgotten that. 2022 broke the 30-point mark by scoring 131 to beat Kilkenny, the first 3 in a row. 30-point mark again in Sunday's 4 in a row against Kilkenny. Truly remarkable, especially with just 5 points to their name after 30 minutes. So he's completely blown away. And Mick Foley, I think, rightly makes the point in the Sunday Times that usually when you do the 4 in a row, none of us remember Cork in the 40s, obviously, or Kilkenny latterly. It kind of feels like, wow, like that is just such an achievement. Whereas in this Limerick team's case, it feels like almost a placeholder, or like a midpoint of a journey is the extraordinary thing. And he wonders the greatest ever, and he says of the 5 teams in hurling and football that earned a shot at 5 in a row before Limerick, only 3 made the All-Ireland final. 2 of them, the Kerry footballers against Offaly and Kilkenny against Tipperary, they were eventually broken by the accumulated strain of the year itself, and teams groomed specifically to beat them over a number of years. And he reckons that, frankly, that's not the case here with Limerick. As Kilkenny set out for the 5 in a row in 2010, Tip had created doubt. Has any team created serious doubt over Limerick's prospects this time?
But how fickle we all are, right?
I know.
2 months ago, everyone said they were back in the pack.
They were 1 point away from going out.
They were there for the Cork.
Unbeatable.
They were there for the taking, and they were creaking at the seams, and they couldn't play without Declan Hannon, and they couldn't do this, and they couldn't do that.
Does it feel now Munster is their biggest obstacle?
100%, but I think the analysis is sprung from they were just so awesome in the second half, and then it automatically turns to 5-0. There was a lot of chatter about 5-0 when Kilkenny did 4 back in the day, if you remember.
But we knew we were headed for a Tip final, and it was going to be an epic.
Yeah, but
Tip were there. Who's there for Limerick?
Look at Munster next year, right? 2 defeats, and you're on the hanging on by your fingernails, right? Could Clare beat them next year? You could see it happening. Could Cork beat them next year? You could see that. My tip surprised that you could see that. So, you know, you could be in a situation where they could be hanging on to get out of Munster.
Who are your favourites for the All-Ireland next year?
Well, right now it's you can't. But I
take your point.
I don't subscribe to the theory that that they're now going into this new stratosphere. I thought they were amazing on the day. I do think teams will improve. I do think teams will start catching up.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's not written in the stars they're going to do 5 in a row.
It's not, but the idea of teams catching up, we had the very same conversation at the final whistle, Joe and Croker last week, kind of saying Munster need to take them out of the equation, because if they get through, they have the time to recalibrate and get better again, because what they achieved this year, if you think without Declan Hannon captain and Sean Finn the best man marker, like he would have been probably marking Owen Cody, who was sensational in the first half. Declan Hannon is like their equivalent of a false six, you know, like he just plays and drifts and drops and links the whole place. So to take those out of the equation and casually win as they won without Cian Lynch, a 2-time hurler the year previously, like they've actually had all the blows. Like imagine what it'd be like if they actually have an All-Ireland where they have a full strength team, and it's just the age profile. The age profile is the kind of the real thing,
and also miles on the clock. Like they've been playing at that level for so long. Like at this point, would you back against them? No. And you know, when the going got tough, they just stepped up to a whole different level. In saying that, they could have come third in Munster, right, and have to go the hard way. They went the direct route, which can suit teams that are on the road a long time. I think teams are catching up. I just think they were so awesome in the final that it's probably coloured our view of
well, sure, that debate was going on immediately. Are they the greatest? And Kilkenny won 6 and 7 years, so kind of team that has
the best team I've seen.
I'd put it this way, I agree with everything you said, Mick. I think you're spot on. I think though, if Limerick get back into an Ireland final, I wouldn't with my life think of it like they're going to win by 10. Do you know what I mean? Once they're in a final, they seem to just rise to the occasion like nobody's business. But it's a long road to a final.
I don't know if I've ever seen a team, because you can compare great teams, but when Kilkenny team were winning, they won nearly every which way, but they were the kind of dominant team. But Limerick, to kind of be able to transform mid-match, I've rarely seen a team be absolutely battered. They were 10 down in the Munster final a few years ago. I remember being down there against Tipperary. Tipperary played them off the pitch, so 10 down on a soaring hot day, came out and it was over within about 14 minutes, and they did it 25 minutes into both, like they're down by 6 points to Galway. So to be able to be playing badly and kind of recalibrate even without a half-time break and find your way, like, and then suddenly hit a level that's 3 gears above what they've been shown for half an hour, like that's very rare of a team to...
it's often said it's hard to switch it on mid-game if you don't start great. It's one of the great cliches. Limerick have been, I was reading the stat, bar their first game against Clare, they've been behind at half-time in every single game of this championship.
That's incredible.
Isn't it just?
It is incredible. But it was at the game itself, there was very strong wind, which actually I don't think people factored in watching on the telly. And when they did get it, but I've never seen a team at that level steamroll a team. Even the Dublin footballers, it was like this tsunami of just aggression and brilliance. They just kind of swept over Kilkenny, and they just couldn't cope. They were just and two teams at an elite level, and one just absolutely.
And Kilkenny are the hardest physically and mentally you would have thought to break. They don't snap.
They don't leaf
and
either,
they were very.
So it's not like you're going up against a team that's a little bit shaky on the confidence
side. Waterford in 08, it's our first time
they
here.
They get started by the lights and they're kind
but Peter Casey, like the shooting, Dermot Burns again from the Hogan stand side, we're looking down level at him, and the arc of the ball from 100 metres, he's pinging shot, but Peter Casey hit one, and there was a brilliant photograph taken of him off balance, I think nearly 1 foot, standing almost on the Crow Park sideline around the halfway, and the caption was this ball goes over the bar. It was just incredible. And again, the wind in Croker doesn't blow in a straight direction because of the horseshoe effect. It swirls. It was a wet day, so the display of shooting and accuracy, again, the only thing that I've seen compares is Kilkenny's in that final, so they'll wait against Waterford, where the first wide, I think they were slagging Martin Comfort for hitting the first wide of the game and midway through the second half, was it? So it was
a different standard. We are pretty much out of time. We picked out a few pieces on what's going on in Saudi Arabia and in the world of football, but we don't quite have time to get into them. There's a great piece, Rob Draper in the Mail is writing about Middle East, and Jonathan Wilson, Cash is King, and if you see it on page 14 of the Sunday Times, it's worth looking into. It's about the most influential agent in Mbappe's team, his mum.
Oh, it's very good. Yeah,
it's really good. I hadn't realised that she was there pulling
the Saudi article is quite good. We did find we did have a little chuckle outside with Pep Guardiola giving out about the new money coming into football from Saudi Arabia.
The irony.
It was quite something. Pep, he said it with a straight face, Pep, apparently. Millions destroying the game.
The new money destroying the game, yeah.
By the way, the Business Post, I think our guests, I must start pointing them more in the direction of the Business Post, which is doing sport now on a routine basis, but they had a by the numbers on All-Ireland final weekend. So the value of the All-Ireland final to the hospitality sector is €10 million for today. And Dublin fans being the decider means that fewer fans are leaving the capital, so pubs and restaurants have a great day. So 10 million quid pumped into the economy. The gate is 7 million, which is serious going.
But it could be so much more if we had that weekend, right?
Yeah,
you could
double those numbers.
But this is supposed to have been really good, and Emmett does a bit, and there's a couple of others in the Business Post. I think it's interesting that nobody has mentioned the fact that there's a very strong likelihood that this 5 FAs bid for Euro 28 as well. You see Turkey look like they might be going in with Italy. That's still TBC around how that plays out, but that's going to be very interesting how that plays out over the next couple of months, and fantastic news for the football associations, and I think for football. I am promised a pint if I mention there's a couple of very good quotes from Kelly O'Keefe there in the Business Post.
Just one pint.
Shane, this is how you become a mover and a shaker in the world, you know. And what are they about?
About GA Go.
Oh yeah, in favour or not in favour?
In favour, yeah.
In favour, okay, very good.
We'll do a separate segment on that, but yeah, fair play. I'd be fully behind that. Just a couple of other quick things. Roy Curtis has a lovely personal piece about kind of Kerry Dublin rivalry and the kind of personal relationships, and there's a nice piece with John Keenan, the hurling ref, Dermot Crowe. It's a nice personal piece about his journey, and obviously he has to kind of head off into the sunset now or hang up the whistle after refereeing the All-Ireland final, so they're worth checking out as well.
Okay, very good, fellas. Thanks so much. I think you're both shooting to Croke Park, are you?
Yes.
I'm going home to pack the car up and then going to Croke Park.
Excellent. Well, listen, enjoy. It should be an epic. Mick O'Keefe here in studio, and Philip Lanigan as well. Thank you, fellas. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe.